Have you ever brought a young adult on a road trip? This would be someone who calls shotgun before leaving, yet she barely takes in the sights along the highway as she looks up attractions on her phone. Okay, maybe she also plays games and looks at memes, but all we know is that she treats the car as a waiting room until the real trip begins. And once you're back home, it really isn't over for her until her friends stop liking and commenting on the pictures she took. Now, let's switch out a few things to tie in today's album. Instead of a road trip, I have been on a mission since August to review every Jandek album, and instead of the vacation spot, I have eagerly awaited the chance to discuss You Walk Alone. With its legacy of accessibility, it serves as a gateway to outsider music's grandest hinterlands, although many don't make it very far. If you've been listening to my more recent reviews, you know how often this record comes up. As the team became more of a traditional rock band, several earlier tracks were hand-picked to receive new guitar licks on top of the lyrics, resulting in less than half of this album consisting of new material. Some fans think of it as Jandek's greatest hits, but to me, it's more of an introduction. While its instrumentation may remind you of other bands, the lyrics are still perplexing as ever, and your tolerance of that will determine your readiness for something trickier. You Walk Alone is certainly one of Jandek's most talked about albums, but it has its share of mysteries. This wasn't especially apparent until the 2014 interview with The Wire. When asked about the blues guitarist on some of his work, Jandek mentioned a guy named Wesley, but the extent of the partnership is still up in the air. To be honest, I originally thought it was Eddie playing on this record, since I recognized his voice on one of the songs. But for now, we are left with three possibilities for each song. It might be all Wesley, all Eddie, or both of them playing rhythm and lead. We also can't rule out Jandek on guitar, although we don't hear the open guitar tuning he preferred. It sounds more like E-flat standard. Besides, it's far more likely that he was the drummer, although we can only be certain about his singing. The rest of the review will be a bit unusual, since I've already talked about most of the tracks. First, the remaining three will get the typical treatment, and then I'll comment on what's different about the older songs. Sometimes the analyses may seem less detailed than last time, but that is in no way a strike against the music. First, there's a southern rock-inspired instrumental called Lavender, whose opening is perhaps the most recognizable riff on the album. It moves from A to G twice before doing this cool little jazzy thing I don't fully understand. Just before they do it again, you start to hear the drumming, which is fairly quick but not too obnoxious, and then the jamming begins. The riff does come back once more, but Lavender is primarily a jam based around the A and G chords. I've been enjoying it since my early days, and it reminds me of everywhere from the flat Midwest to the streets of Brooklyn. For a Jandek song, it's surprisingly versatile as background music. In terms of new music, Time and Space is the record's biggest contribution to the catalog. At first, this 12-bar blues in the key of G sharp will seem very familiar to the newbies. The variety of guitar fills keeps it exciting, and the two distinct guitar tracks give a sense of completeness despite the lack of bass. Thus, the first real challenge is to figure out what Jandek is talking about. It starts and finishes with what I think is a verse about funeral clothes, since he mentions coffins, and that leads us to the first refrain, "Put them in the closet," which is used in two other contexts. Later on, Jandek says it like it should be obvious to us by now.
Just put them, you know where, in the closet, that's where, in the closet.
The other refrain is just, "Oh, time, oh, space," although it doesn't seem to relate to anything. In fact, the same applies to most of the song, since it's another one of those Jandek riddles, this time including elements like silver thread around the neck, oranges from Florida, and jellyfish from Ireland. Fortunately, we are distracted from our confusion by the gritty blues sound, which was so effective that the song was used for a bar scene in the film Calvin Marshall. To this day, I don't know of any other films with Jandek songs, so I rank Time and Space pretty high for that reason alone. Skipping to the very end, we have War Dance, which seems less popular than the other tracks I mentioned, since it doesn't even have its own YouTube video. Give it a chance though. Rhythmically and thematically, it might be the closest Jandek ever got to heavy metal. In the lyrics, the narrator identifies with Native American tribes as he goes off to some unknown battle, praying for guidance from the natural world. The whole thing stays in E-flat minor, and Jandek just sings when he feels like it, so you can do a lot with this track if you decide to cover it. I had fun with it in 2013, and the cover on the Naked in the Afternoon tribute album is a faster garage rock version. Now we move on to the remakes. While some of them leave a bigger impact than others, they are all a lot of fun because they are very distinct from each other. Of course, the other great mystery is how Jandek decided which songs to bring back. I praised some of them in their old forms, and deemed others lackluster, but he hasn't commented on them. We know he left some of his favorite work alone, so I'm guessing he saw potential in these songs, and wanted to make them top 10 worthy. Did he succeed? Well, let's start with the lesser-known tracks. When discussing Quinn Boys in the last review, I said I didn't like the guitar playing, but found certain lyrics fascinating. Quinn Boys 2 basically rectifies the situation by incorporating the kind of southern rock you hear on Lavender, except more cheerful and probably with the loudest drumming on the record. It also has some progression, since everyone kind of mellows out in the second half. Judging by how long it originally took for me to find this song, I think Quinn Boys 2 is pretty underrated. Since I first heard it during summer 2013, it always reminds me of hot days at a park I used to visit with my ex. Originally known as Customary on Interstellar Discussion, The Way That You Act is the oldest song here. As I said before, nothing about the original stands out to me, so I stick to this electric version. In particular, I've always liked how the rhythm guitar sounds like something from a 60s psychedelic blues song, and it goes a long way with the absence of drums. While I do prefer the other remakes, the weakest one is still pretty damn good on an album like this. Then there's I Know the Times, which originally went by the boring title Open E on Modern Dances. This version is unique for two reasons. It's the album's only track with Eddie singing, which I always like to hear, and it's the only one with a single guitar track. That makes the ending a little awkward, since the guitarist is just soloing before the lyrics are even finished. The chords sound like slow funk music, which results in kind of a bored or lazy feel, although the chords do change a bit as the song goes on. Of course, these are still quality lyrics, so you might find the song underrated if the guitar playing appeals to you. Except for Time and Space, it seems like all of these tracks are overshadowed by the last two I'll be talking about, both of which have high sentimental value for me. If you haven't heard the lyrics, you would have no way of knowing what The Cat That Walked from Shelbyville is supposed to be. I suppose the title could refer to a missing cat that showed up at Jandek's house, or cat might just refer to some guy. Either way, there's no clear connection to the song formerly known as For Today. The lyrics are the same big riddle as last time, except now the guitar tracks are absolutely beautiful. I must have first heard it during winter, because it always reminds me of freshly fallen snow. Some people think it sounds like The Velvet Underground, although I haven't heard enough of their music to verify that. Still, their guitarist must have been legendary to inspire stuff like this. I always thought of it as an excerpt of a jam 3 or 4 times as long, so I guess I just never want it to end. It's a Jandek song you could play for just about anybody. The last song title came out of left field, but you're more likely to recognize When the Telephone Melts, although the jury is out on why it's not a telegraph this time. Maybe this was Jandek's way of modernizing the song. Regardless, the title track from Telegraph Melts was basically given the power ballad treatment, and the result is something reminiscent of Pink Floyd's Wish You Were Here. There was a comment that said that when I first heard the song, so I've been associating the two ever since. Also, Jandek sings on this version, so this time the lyrics are from the boyfriend's perspective. Instead of I was a woman, he says I was a man. However, one strike against this version is that we don't hear a second vocalist towards the end, but with music as powerful as this, that's forgivable. While I never forget this is a 9-minute track, it always feels shorter to me because I'm always enthralled by the emotion in Jandek's voice, even though he's no John Lennon. The last 2.5 minutes are instrumental, which is honestly a brilliant way to make us reflect on what we just heard. And once again, Jandek put the ideal closing track towards the end, but not at the very end. That son of a bitch. Still, it doesn't get much better than this in the second Jandek era, and a live version would complete a holy trinity. I think most fans would agree this is one of the best loved Jandek albums. Sometimes I make it a point to journey into his more challenging stuff, but no matter when I'm through with that, You Walk Alone is always there to remind me how these journeys began. The music is great, but given its status as a sort of recap album, is it really fair to compare it to the typical ones? It depends on how much importance you place on the lyrics. If the guitar riffs and solos are what truly matter, I guess Jandek could just bark like a dog and it'll still be as good. But if You Walk Alone was meant to have the definitive versions of these songs, it's a resounding success no matter where it belongs on a list.